Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. Today is Monday, December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Hey, I am broadcasting from Jacksonville, Florida, where I am spending time with the family and probably some friends. I might try to get to see some friends. So shout out to everyone who listens to the show that is from North Florida, the Jacksonville area. It took us 5 hours to get from Atlanta to Jacksonville. Yesterday, it took 10 hours, 9.5 hours. So it was because of all of the traffic, all of the rain, all of the accidents. We threw 4.5 extra hours on our trip. So just to everyone who's traveling, please be safe out there. We had to drive. It was raining so bad. We had to drive like 55, 60 miles an hour. So do whatever you have to do to arrive safely and enjoy your break, whatever it is you celebrate or whatever you don't celebrate. Enjoy some time off with the family. Okay, let's get to the news. Axios.com is breaking news last night. They got access to a fundraiser email from the Buttigieg campaign. And according to Axios.com, quote, in a recent email exchange with a wealthy prospective donor, a top fundraiser for the Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg made an offer that was unusually blunt, even by modern pay-for-play standards. They said, quote, if you want to get on the campaign's radar now before he is flooded with donations after winning Iowa and New Hampshire, you can use the link below for donations. The Buttigieg campaign lists HK Park on the website as one of his top fundraisers. HK Park is a recipient of that email and raised $25,000 for the campaign. What's interesting about this is how much Buttigieg is trying to defend this broken structure. Now, listen, I've seen politicians they absolutely have to raise money. They spend upwards of 6 hours a day raising money because you can't do anything without money, right? You can't fund a campaign without money. So this is not to say that they have to be money free. It's to say, what are you exchanging for that money? And this is what Pete Buttigieg was trying to defend. Not only defend, it's worse than defending it. He's defending it in public, but he's actively promoting it behind the scenes. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if there are plenty of other candidates who use this technique of saying, if you want to get in, you need to get in now and give us some money now so that we can give you some attention, right? But this is particularly nefarious with Pete Buttigieg because of how he's trying to sell this as him being the most progressive candidate. When we literally have an example, honestly, 2 examples. Elizabeth Warren says she doesn't do call time. Call time in politics is when you leave everything else that you're doing and you go sit behind a phone and you call donors for 6 hours a day. And oftentimes, and I want to go on a quick tangent. I always wondered why politicians are so feckless sometimes. Well, they're spending all their time all day, every day raising money because they have to pay for their campaign reelection. So you have an example, though, of Elizabeth Warren, who doesn't do call time. She doesn't spend time. And that time itself is giving time to donors, right? That's the whole point. You get on the phone with somebody, you make them feel special. You talk about yourself and then you talk about them like you really know them and that you're really concerned about their issue. And if you stay on the phone long enough, they might convince you about their issue. Well, what happens when their issue is keeping taxes low for them so that they don't have to pay anything into the system, subsequently hurting the working class and hurting our safety nets? What if their issue is what if they're from the energy sector and their issue is maintaining the status quo with regards to fossil fuels? This is what happens. This is what happens on those phone calls. It's not just the backroom, smoke-filled back rooms. It's the phone time. It's the call time that every politician has to do, except for 2. Well, 3 now. I believe AOC says that she doesn't do any call time. So it's Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are presenting a fundamental shift particularly the last two, Bernie Sanders rather, and AOC, they're signifying that this can be done with a totally different format. But instead of Democrats trying to embrace this new way, so what it does is it places the power in the hands of the people. Really simple. It really says that you have to have a platform that is appealing to millions of people. You use social media and technology to connect to those people, and you fundraise by having good policy versus fundraising by going into the wine cave. Now, what else is interesting over the weekend? You had quite a few people come out just rabidly upset about the attack from Elizabeth Warren on Buttigieg's wine cave, and just the left space in general, people on Twitter talking about how ridiculous this entire episode was. I mean, they were really upset, like someone was trying to tell them that they can never drink wine again. It was quite a few white women on Twitter just losing their minds because we went after this concept of fundraising with uber elite people who can afford $900 bottles of wine. No one's coming to take your wine. No one is coming to tell you that you can't have your cliche glass of wine before bed. One in particular, Jane Lynch, she was one of the characters on the show Glee. Never watched a single episode. But this is what she said on Twitter. She said, "Hello, everyone. Billionaires and wine caves have as much right to say who gets to be president as waitresses and diners and plumbers in my bathroom. Class warfare is ugly, Elizabeth Warren. Thanks for listening, everyone." So, yeah, they do have every right to have a say in who becomes president. But this is literally the opposite. This is saying that this entire campaign finance structure that we have allows billionaires to have as much influence. It allows 600 billionaires to have as much influence as the 327 million rest of us. That's the problem, Jane. It's not that they don't have as much influence, or it's not that we're trying to keep them from having equal amounts of influence. It's that they have more, and they have magnitudes of order more influence than 327 million of the rest of us. And the way that influence, or the location, the quintessential example going forward of where this influence takes place will always be the wine cave. Listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this weekend at a rally in Los Angeles with Bernie Sanders.
By the way, for anyone who accuses us for instituting purity tests, it's called having values. It's called giving a damn. It's called having standards for your conduct, to not be funded by billionaires, but to be funded by the people, which is different.
There is a difference, a fundamental difference, when your campaign is funded by millions of individual small donors and when your campaign is funded by millionaires and billionaires. Because you have to give them access. If you don't give them access, and access equals political power, and political power translates into legislation, and legislation translates into this tax bill. An article from The Guardian that's circulating again came out in October that outlines exactly how much billionaires and millionaires are saving on Donald Trump's tax bill. That happens not only as a result of bad economic paradigms and bad economic theories, but it also happens as a result of constantly being inundated by the money of millionaires and billionaires. You begin to serve them. It is inevitable. It's unavoidable when you take their money. You cannot say in one breath that you give access and influence. Well, let's be sure. Access is influence. No one is giving you their money except to have access and influence. Period. And if you want to try to tell us that it's otherwise, then you're lying. And we know liars. We know that lie. We've seen that lie. And that's why we have such a problem with Pete Buttigieg, because he thinks he can lie to our face and we'll simply accept it because he says it with a smile.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Well, all right. We had a special request to bring back this music. So we'll alternate back and forth, but it's still a patron party. Special shout out to Travis Durant. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. Special thank you to Blaine Winford. Thank you for becoming a patron. Special thank you to Custer for becoming a patron. Also, a special thank you to James for becoming a patron. And Shade, thank you for becoming a patron. And I feel like I forgot to mention a couple of people who increased their pledges, so let me just go through them all. Green, thank you for increasing your pledge. Timothy Allen, thank you for increasing your pledge. And Sammy, thank you so much for increasing your pledge. You too can become a part of this prestigious and this prodigious family by going to, well, actually, I don't know why I haven't been including the third P for alliteration's sake. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and supporting the show. When we're on our way. We are on our way. Once we hit 500 patrons, I am going to bring back the live show. Now, full disclosure, the live show is going to be hella early. It's going to be early, like I'm recording now. It's going to be somewhere around 7 o'clock in the morning. But, you know, that means you get to call in live while you're in traffic. You're stuck in traffic. And just put the phone on Bluetooth and call in and speak your mind. All right. There's a game that's played by centrists. This next segment is directed only towards international centrists. People who like to position themselves, even if their politics are slightly different. On the international stage, there's a group of people who like to position themselves in between the far right and the far left. And I'm extremely proud to say that I am a part of the far left. I am not the furthest left. I feel like I need to make that qualification. There are plenty of friends of mine, associates of mine. Well, maybe one or two actual friends, and the rest are associates. And then the rest hate my guts, that are part of the Marxist-Leninist crowd that are probably the furthest left. So even if you think my show is radical, my show is as bland in terms of revolutionary radical politics as Bernie Sanders. Okay. But anyway, off of that tangent, there is a group of people, politicians and thinkers, quote unquote thinkers, who on the international stage take up the position in between the far right and the far left. And I'm noticing more and more that they have the same exact technique, whether they are in the UK or whether they're in the United States. And it's quite possibly because they share consultants. They share consultants, right? Some of the consultants here in the United States are also consultants there in the UK. Okay, where am I going with this? Well, what I've noticed is that the people who position themselves in between, and by definition, like we discussed on Friday, that means they are triangulating. Their number one weapon against the left, particularly the white left, is to label them as either racist or out of touch with minorities. That's what they do with Bernie Sanders all the time. They try to say, oh, he just doesn't understand black people. Well, he doesn't understand minorities because he's white, and because he's white. But then, and because he's white and old. But apparently Joe Biden, who is old, is just the same age or a year younger, and he's white. He perfectly understands and he perfectly gets race problems, even though there's plenty of video to show that Joe Biden not only hung out with segregationists, but he had the entire disposition of a segregationist. But the technique is the point. And I mean, there's so much meat to this conversation that I keep going on these tangents. The point is that one of their number one techniques is to label anyone on the left that is white, or hell, they'll do it to a black person. They'll call you a sellout. Similarly, if you're black or if you're brown and you're on the left, what do they label you? They label you anti-Semitic. And then they go as far as to Even now, there's a push to label Bernie Sanders anti-Semitic. There's a group on Twitter, and this is still, I'm still not even at the story, because the story I'm going to talk about is an international story, but I have to set it up so that you can see this pattern. But first, here in the United States, there's a group that just started on Twitter with all kinds of connections, foreign donations. There's a nonprofit group on Twitter, Democrats Against Anti-Semitism, and they just did an entire Twitter expose on why Bernie Sanders, even though he's ethnically Jewish, he's actually anti-Semitic. Okay. Now, go with me all the way to the UK. There's an artist called Stormy Z. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I mispronounced his name, from the UK. He said something this weekend that has infuriated a whole lot of people. He said that the UK is definitely 100% racist and Boris Johnson has made it worse. Well, guess who's coming to his rescue? Some of the same people who looked at the labor movement there in the UK and called them racist. So for some of those people who are coming to the rescue of the honor of the UK, and in this case, he specifically called out the far-right Boris Johnson. That wasn't enough. It wasn't, he didn't just say, yes, this country is racist. 100% fact that this country is racist. And Boris Johnson is making it worse. So he targeted the right with his animus. But you have people, some of the same people who went after Jeremy Corbyn and the labor movement, those centrists, those Lib Dems, those people who occupy that center space on the international stage. They came to the rescue of Boris Johnson and the honor of the UK by saying this guy was wrong. Well, wait a minute. You just outlined the problems that you see of race with the labor movement. But when somebody black calls out the racism that's in your country, you're like, wait a minute, no, you got it all wrong. That is so much like the United States. It's creepy. It's ridiculous. And it's like centrists they have one playbook, and this is the playbook, and this is what all of this setup was to tell you this. Centrists, no matter where you find them, especially centrists in power. I'm not talking about ye old person on Twitter or somebody who's trying to decide between Buttigieg and Joe Biden. I'm not talking about you, the individual. I'm talking about people in power. I've seen them do this, and we see it happening all the time. They only see racism when it's beneficial to their political agenda. Whereas conservatives and Republicans at the far right, anywhere on this international stage, they use racism for their political agenda. Centrists will only recognize racism when it benefits their political agenda. Case in point, I used to work for a media company here, in Atlanta. That's the reason I moved to Atlanta. And the only time that they were excited about us talking about racism is when we could lay it at the feet of Donald Trump. But whenever the conversation came to the racism in the Democratic Party, they could barely stand it. And eventually we shut down the entire company. That's because centrists can only have a desire to recognize anti-Semitism. Let's swap it out. Anti-Semitism when it benefits their political agenda. And so they're fully capable of seeing it. They just will never see it in themselves, number one. But then number two, they 100% know how to leverage that claim. And who do they leverage against? Well, it's one thing to leverage it against the people who are actually committing it, but they see the effectiveness of that attack. Democrats Against Anti-Semitism, this small group here in the United States that is well funded, even though they have a very small Twitter presence, they are well funded. Look at the type of research that they put out on Bernie Sanders. They saw how effective the claims of anti-Semitism against Jeremy Corbyn was in the UK. And hell, they didn't even just need that example. I mean, here in the United States, I believe it was back in 2012 when Barack Obama was considering getting rid of Debbie Wasserman Schultz from the DNC chair position. It leaked out that she was going to attack him, calling him anti-Semitic. And what did Barack Obama do? He backed down and she remained in the chair position, I think another 4 years. I may have those numbers wrong. But they have seen how effective that attack is. And so what they do is, if we can do it to the right, then we sure as hell can do it to the left. And so you have two things that's going on here simultaneously. Centrists, of course, the right in almost any country on the face of this planet uses racism as their political organizing tool. The centerpiece of far right movements across this country, across this world, the centerpiece is racism. But centrists, who like to triangulate between the far left and the far right, they sit themselves in a position where they can ignore the racism, their own racism. They ignore how they're complicit with this system of white supremacy. They ignore how they're complicit with all of the bigotry that goes on, or how they benefit from it. If nothing else, how they are privileged by it. They can ignore it at the drop of a dime and then turn around and levy that claim against the left. And do not get it twisted. There is a problem of racism on the left, but when I tell you it is a fundamentally different problem, each of these categories, and I don't want to belabor this too long because there are other stories to cover. The far right uses racism. They use it as a political organizing tool. Centrists don't recognize any racism except for when it is beneficial for them to recognize it. And on the left, the biggest problem is that they try to not recognize that racism can exist outside of capitalism and has to be addressed separately. But all across this globe, we see a movement by centrists trying to maintain political power, and they do so by correctly identifying the racist problem with the right, which uses race and anti-Semitism as their central organizing mechanism. But they completely ignore the racism within their own ranks and will never discuss their own problems with white supremacy and anti-Semitism. And then they will cavalierly level that claim towards the left just because it's politically expedient.
And we don't speak out of hate, but we know a milquetoast neoliberal politician when we see one.
I probably should start a segment called Cornel West Out of Context, because even out of context, Cornel West is dope as hell. And I'm not even going to discuss that clip. I just wanted to play it. So Christianity Today was the organization, the magazine that published an op-ed calling for Donald Trump to be removed because of the investigation and because of how much Donald Trump does not align with their Christian values. Now, to be sure, I want to establish very clearly that there are many different variations of Christianity, particularly as it pertains to our politics. Christianity Today is extremely right-wing. I have more in common, me personally, which is why you all listen to my show. I have more in common with atheists than I do the people at Christianity Today. Listening to the interview, they have almost the same exact talking points as Donald Trump. Donald Trump just, he's a bridge too far for them. Okay. I just have to make that clear. They published an article saying that he should be removed based on the investigation and based on the fact that he's a bridge too far in terms of Christianity. He's just not Christ-like. 200 pastors, including Robert Jeffress and a whole bunch of other far right-wing pastors, signed a letter attacking Christianity Today because Christianity Today called them far right. See, labels aren't important, but you are what you do. Whether you want to call yourself something, when you operate in the far right wing space of this country, you are far right. And even if you take your religion over there and say, oh, well, we're not far right, we're just Christian. Well, then you have developed and maintained and celebrate a Christianity that is far right. I only mention this story for two reasons. The first is because out of all the things they decided to organize around, they organize around the fact that they have hurt feelings. 200 pastors organized around the fact that their feelings are hurt because somebody called them out. They didn't organize on behalf of any of the children at the border. They didn't organize on behalf of our Muslim brothers and sisters who, quite frankly, have far more in common with us than anything else, biblically speaking. Like, I don't even want to get into the theology of it, but there is a connection. There's a deep connection between Christianity and Islam, just as much as there any connection. If there is such a thing as Judeo-Christian values, right? Jewish Christian values. If that exists, then there most certainly is required by the Bible that Islamic Christian values exist. The relationship, the connection. But I digress. These 200 pastors, the thing that bothered them wasn't the caging of children at the border. It wasn't his profanity. It wasn't his appeal to racism. It wasn't his Islamophobia. It was the fact that one right-wing Christian group had the nerve to call out another right-wing Christian group. See, when I recorded that about 2 weeks ago, and I was lamenting, and I was like, is there not a single Christian organization that will stand up against Trump? A week later, we found one, Christianity Today. And then a week later, or a few days later, rather, we see the reality that they are the only one. And I know I'm expecting too much from people who follow the tradition. They come from a lineage of Christians who have used their religion throughout history as a bludgeoning tool to get power. They are the theological descendants. They are the theological descendants of the Crusaders. They are the theological descendants of those people who use the Bible to justify slavery. They are the theological descendants of those people who use the Bible to justify lynchings and Jim Crow. And now they are in a position where they are using their Christianity as a tool of oppressing everyone in this country, more precisely than oppressing. They're using Christianity as a tool of maintaining their political and economic advantage over everyone else. That's what they use it for. As we move beyond direct oppression and we're moving towards an egalitarian society, we're demanding, right? We are demanding equality in this society. They are using their religion to maintain the status quo power structure in this country. I'm not surprised. In fact, this is what I fully expected. I am glad that there was one organization, but it is more consistent with what I know about evangelical Christians that there would be 200 to 1, a 200 to 1 ratio of organizations and individuals, leaders of churches, mega churches, a 200 to 1 ratio of people who will use their faith to justify anything Donald Trump does. 200 versus the one who stood out of the crowd and said, enough's enough. Donald Trump has to go. All right, everybody, I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, I will pick up the last story that I'm dropping today. The story that I'm not covering today that I will cover tomorrow is Ben Shapiro being under siege by his own creation, the people that he fostered. The movement that he fostered is now coming back to destroy him. I'll cover that tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. And for those of you who I won't see until you get back from your break, have a wonderful holiday, a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, everything, whatever you celebrate, whatever you don't celebrate, enjoy your time. Take care.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.